For more, we're joined by Middle East analyst Thane Rosenbaum. Thane, this is not the first time that we see mysterious attacks on Iranian targets, warehouses, depots, and shipments of arms in the territory of Iraq. Do you believe that the United States is really behind that, as the Shiite militias in Iraq claim?
I think that the United States, through Israel, is probably responsible. This sounds like the Israelis. The Israelis are really, first of all, they're really good at, and they feel very strongly about destroying weapons caches that were created. Anytime you hear that there's an airstrike or an explosion in which the target was about weapons, the storing of weapons, especially if it originated from Iran, you can probably imagine that it's going to be the Israelis. They've been doing it in Lebanon. They've been doing it in Syria.
But Iraq is far away from Israel. It's not like neighboring countries like Syria and Lebanon that you mentioned.
No, that's quite right. And I'm not saying that the United States wasn't aware of this.
Or involved.
That's quite right, Tal. Look, you know, I've been saying on your show for a long time now, we're in a Cold War with Iran. The United States, this is a Cold War. And what happens in Cold Wars is you have skirmishes. You have small little battles. You have a lot of talking to each other in hostile, provocative terms, but you have small battles. This is a small battle. Now remember, the United States has a lot invested in Iraq for so many reasons. You know, they fought a war in there, and what they're not interested is having Iran's influence in Iraq. So you're talking about the very strategic asset, one that the United States has a lot of investment in, and the Israelis are concerned that there's a regional war, and there are all of these proxies. They're located in Syria and Yemen and Lebanon and Iraq. And the United States and Israel, and of course the United States you're seeing with the Strait of Hormuz, these are ways to send a message to Iran not to be so secure that your proxies will be able to fight a war for you.
The IDF, the Israeli military, says that Iran is trying to create a new land corridor from Iran that goes to Syria, to Lebanon, through Iraq. Is Iran trying to turn Iraq into its new Syria, its new military base?
I think it's a great insight, Tal. I've been saying for a long time that the whole fixation on Syria was to try to create an actual pathway, and the best pathway next would be Iraq.
It is more remote than Israel, as
it is more remote, but again, you're talking about Iran's very promiscuous foreign policy in this region. They've been involved in a number of countries throughout the Middle East, and so it wouldn't surprise me.
Despite U.S. sanctions.
Despite the U.S. sanctions, right. But with the sense that Russia is somewhat on their side, at least in connection with Syria.
Now, explain the complexity of the situation. They have the Iraqi prime minister is Shiite, is not fond of Iran, but yet you have, Iranian influence everywhere in every level of, government, everyday life in this country, in Iraq, and yet you have American forces there on the ground. How does the Iraqi government balance that?
It's the mess of the Middle East. You're talking about 1.6 billion Muslims. And you're talking about the division between Shiites and Sunnis, many of whom hate each other. Whether they're government leaders or not, they're constantly at war with each other. Iraq has been this kind of very promiscuous area that you're quite right. Is it Sunni? There was a Sunni awakening that actually helped the United States regain Iraq. But at the same time, you're seeing incredible influence among the Shiites. And that is where the proxies are for Iran. That's their base.
And it's definitely a message, these mysterious attacks. Thane Rosenbaum, thank you for joining us. We appreciate your time as always.